Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible come together to fulfill the story of God. Jay.
I'm Fletcher.
And I'm Abby.
And welcome to Season 3.
Woo!
Yay.
This is a special summer season. And in this season, we're exploring some key people in the Bible who weren't actually followers of the Hebrew God Yahweh.
Interesting. So instead, we're going to be talking about people who worshipped other gods. We're taking a look at the stories of people outside of God's chosen people, outside of the Israelites, outside of the Christians, looking at them.
Yep.
And we thought it'd be cool to examine some of the other belief systems at the time of the Israelites and Jesus, and what they thought of the one true God, and where their belief systems are today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So today, we're actually starting out in Genesis with Ishmael and Hagar. But as we like to do, we have a question to start our episode with, to start our whole season with.
Yeah.
First, better be a good one then if we're starting off the whole season.
Well, just to make sure that it's good, we're doing two questions actually. So
two mediocre questions to make
honestly.
up. No, I'm just joking.
They are kind of
To make up for one good question.
So, because of the way that the story unfolds, there's a desert involved, and so we would like to know, who would you like to banish to the desert? And if you were banished to a desert, is there a desert that you would like to be banished to?
No, I'd rather not be banished, honestly.
I mean, there's that, but you've got to choose.
You're getting
desert.
banished.
You're getting
You got to
banished,
choose
and
one.
it's going to be a desert.
At least you get to pick which one you want.
Yeah,
That's fair.
Okay, Jay, you said you had an answer to this one, so why don't you go first?
Yeah. So the person that I would like to banish to the desert is whoever runs our social media account, because I'm continually thrown under the bus by our social media manager, and so I would like to banish that person. I don't know who
That
it
was
is.
the same as my answer
I'm not
earlier.
sure who it is,
Wow.
but I would like to banish
Feeling
them
the love.
to the desert. That was, as soon as I saw that question, I said, social media manager, gotta go.
You're so funny.
Yeah. It wasn't meant to be funny.
Got a little
All right.
little
Well,
hot
okay. And what desert would
hot
you
discussion
like to be,
here.
banished
let's see who.
Oh,
you
that's
guys would
right.
like to
Okay,
banish first, and then we'll
who
move
would
on
you
the
like to
second.
banish to the desert, Abby?
I don't know.
Our social media.
Now
manager?
Jay.
Now, Jay. Well, at least I'll have company.
Sometimes Josh. I don't know.
Wow.
Uh-oh.
Not right now.
Okay.
I don't know. This is a hard one. I don't know. Fletcher, do you have an answer?
No, I'm waiting for you.
I gave two, so.
You said sometimes
Sometimes
Josh.
and not
And
really.
right now,
Jay.
Jay.
Right now, Jay.
I'm going to go with our social. No.
Oh my gosh.
Who would I like to banish to the desert? It's such a cruel
I mean,
punishment.
that's the
It
thing. Like,
really is.
if the person who you might seem to mention is listening, like
Yeah.
Josh might be listening, and
Our social
maybe
media
Abby will
manager
get
is
home and
listening.
find herself along with the social media manager banished to the
There
desert.
you go.
Yeah. It's a cruel punishment.
Yeah.
Banished to the desert.
Yeah. What about, like, the third grade teacher or something? I don't know.
I like my third grade. Fifth grade? No, I'm just joking. I don't remember. Riley gave
No,
away
Riley
my
would like
food
it.
today.
Riley did give
Riley
away your
would
food
love the
today,
desert. She
and-
likes hot
But
places.
no, I would
Thankful
never.
for that.
Then I'd be alone, and I'd be like in a desert.
And Fletcher doesn't do well when he's not with Riley.
That's fair.
Like, okay, so here's a story for you. So we were, a couple of our cousins were in Alberta, and we called our cousin chat, and Fletcher answers, and he's all by himself, and he was so sad. He's sitting in the dark. He's like, you guys are all gone, and Riley's
They didn't
gone,
invite us on a trip
and I'm
to
all
Alberta.
by
They went to the
myself."
mountains.
And he was like crying
And
by
then you just
himself.
sat at home in the dark.
Because Riley
Yeah.
wasn't there.
Well, what else do you do? when
So
you're not
then
in Alberta?
maybe you could banish the cousins to the desert, but then you'd be
You would
without
get
them.
the
Yeah, you know
FOMO.
what? I'm gonna banish my cousins for not
Banish
inviting me to Alberta, and I know some of them listen to it, so
There
All
we
the
go.
ones that went listened to it.
there you
Okay.
go.
There
Okay.
you go.
That's what you get.
And
Next
so the
time
next
invite me.
question is, what desert would you want to be banished to? And for me, I think I would like to be banished to the Mojave Desert, where I would bring a guitar and sit by a Joshua tree and learn and sing all of the U2 songs, the entire catalog.
My gosh.
If I was banished, I would
You gonna go to
commit my
Burning Man?
time.
Burning Man while you're there?
No,
Is that in that desert?
No, I don't
Alright.
think that's Mojave. That's it's California.
Joshua,
or
yeah,
somewhere.
Joshua
Okay.
Tree's in
Joshua.
California.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. Right.
I don't know
I just
much
stay
about
far-
deserts,
I'm
but
staying far away from Burning Man. But
All right.
I'm gonna learn
they might burn you.
every U2 song.
Fair enough.
Okay, you do that. Fletcher, do you have one?
I'm currently on Wikipedia list of deserts. If I'm
Me
completely
too.
honest.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go before you say
Go
it then.
for it.
So honestly, like, I don't do well with heat, so I'm really leaning towards Antarctica.
Right?
But I think actually out of the deserts on this list of lists of deserts in the world, I think the Atacama Desert, which is in like Chile.
Okay.
It looks really
And it's like
cool.
coastal, so it's not
Yeah.
actually too.
Yeah.
Too
It's also
hot.
the first listing in South American deserts.
There we
Oh,
go.
that's not where I had. Bolivia is the top of my list, and it's right beside Chile, and so I do know about that one.
Right.
And so
Cool.
I think that one, if not Antarctica.
Yeah.
Go with the desert that's like right outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. Because then I can just go to Las Vegas if I get thirsty. You know what I mean? Because it's in a desert.
Oh my
Right.
And I'll just stay in Las Vegas and
Yeah.
technically still be.
Just
All
walk
right.
into a casino.
Or I
where
guess
it's,
that
like,
works
free
for like,
pop the whole
yeah,
time.
exactly.
There you
For
go.
like right outside of Dubai because that's on a desert as well.
You know, I
on the
thought
Arabian
about Dubai,
Peninsula.
but then I just like
No.
not
Drive
really,
some
yeah.
Lamborghinis.
They don't
Yeah,
speak
yeah.
English, everybody, so
Oh yeah.
that wouldn't be great. All right, well, what desert would you want to be banished to?
What a
And
weird
who would you
question.
like to banish to a desert? Let us know at the story
Free
at
pops. Free pops
bfmc.org.
in Las Vegas casinos is what that came down to.
That's right. I'm all about free anything, so that's me. So, anyways, as always, we do encourage you to read the stories for yourselves. And for this one, you may have actually read the story in the first season, because we are going all the way back to Genesis, back in the beginning. And we typically, when we lay out the season, we try and do things in a chronological order. So each season we're going back to Genesis pretty much, as long as we're covering Old Testament material. And so here we are, we're back in Genesis. And as we've mentioned before, Genesis is written by Moses while in the wilderness with the Israelites, around the time before they enter into the promised land. And today we're talking about Ishmael and Hagar. And Ishmael was the son and the servant of Abraham. So Ishmael was his firstborn son, but it was not a legitimately born son because he was born with his servant, who was Hagar. So Abraham was called out of his hometown of Ur to go to the land of Canaan. And in that journey, God made him a promise. And that promise was to make his family into a great nation, to bless him and make his name great, and that in him all of the families of the world would be blessed. And so when his family got to Canaan, God told him that he would give this land to all of his offspring as well. But there was a slight problem, because Abraham did not have any offspring. And so Abraham says, how is this possible since I'm without an heir? And God tells him that he would have a son. And we have to keep in mind that Abraham was 75 years old when he left Haran, the place that he lived before. And so at 75, he begins to...
I mean, men can always conceive, but his
Right.
wife being of similar age is probably going to have
Yeah.
a little bit of a problem as she gets up there in the years.
And so he was told very late in life that he would have not only an offspring, that he would become a great nation.
So, like in every episode that we've talked about Genesis in the past, the dates aren't 100% certain. They are debated constantly, and your answer really depends on the sources you use for dates. So for today, I think it was about 2000 BC. We didn't go into very specifics last 2 seasons ago. It's been a while, since last time we talked about Abraham. 2 seasons ago, we said around 2000 BC, which is still true. We're going to try to go a little bit more accurate. But again, it's hotly debated. It really depends on where you're getting your your dates and what you're basing them off
Right.
of. So we're kind of basing it off the confident date of the splitting of Israel and Judah at the time after Solomon's death, and that happened around 931 BC. And then working back using a bunch of different biblical references, you get Abraham's birth around 2166 BC,
Right.
and then his son Isaac being born when he was 100 in around 2066 BC. So kind of in the region around Canaan, where Abraham is Mesopotamia. That's actually where Abraham was from originally. It's
Right.
Ur and Haran. That's up in Mesopotamia, and it's thriving. It's around the Sumerian Renaissance, and it's the beginning of the rise of the Amorite kingdom. Down south is Egypt, and Egypt's already fully established. It's been around for a long time already, and it's in its first intermediate period and into the Middle Kingdom period. So Egypt, you can always look at Egypt timeline and be like, oh yeah, this is what's going on, because they're constant. They're always there.
Yeah.
And then in the land of Canaan is mostly filled with small city-states and trade routes, basically, between Egypt and Mesopotamia. So that's what's going on.
Yeah,
at
so
that
in
time.
terms of geography, Canaan, which we know from past episodes, was part of modern-day Jordan, parts of Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. Hagar ends up running away to a desert on her way to Shur, which most people assume is somewhere along the Arabian Peninsula. And that would substantiate the claims that Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabia. She ended up somewhere between Kadesh and Bered at a well which she named Bir Lahai Roi, meaning the one who sees me. So, but no one knows the exact location of that well. But many guess that it might be somewhere in the Negev desert. But there's some evidence that doesn't.
Why didn't you pick the Negev desert then in your... No. It's got a good, cool well somewhere.
Yeah.
No.
There you go. But there is some evidence that doesn't quite make sense with that location being in the Negev desert. But so scholars aren't totally sure about exactly where. But again, Canaan area.
All right. Here we go. We're getting into it.
Into the
Season
meat.
3, first story.
Let's go.
Hagar and Ishmael. So today's story starts off with Abraham and his wife, Sarah. And I know if you're reading this, you're going, wait a minute, it doesn't say Abraham or Sarah. It says Abram and Sarai.
Right.
At one point throughout this story, God changes their names to Abraham and Sarah. So I'm just going to call them Abraham and Sarah
Right.
and not switch back and forth because it's going to get way too confusing because it does happen in
Yeah.
the middle of this story.
Yep.
And I'm going to confuse you. I'm going to confuse myself. And it's just going to be frustrating. So Abraham and Sarah. Sarah, they've heard this promise from God that they're going to have a son. But she's concerned that she can't have children. She's getting older and thinks it's a good idea for Abraham to go have kids with one of her servants, an Egyptian woman named Hagar.
Mm-hmm.
So this takes place around 10 years after they had moved to Canaan. And Abraham actually takes Hagar as a wife and sleeps with her and gets her pregnant. And then when Sarah finds out that Hagar is pregnant, she's not happy.
Right.
This is a little bit of a sticking point for her. I was always confused. It was her idea.
It's her idea.
It was her idea.
Yeah.
I think that's all we're gonna say.
Yeah, but maybe she was just hoping that it wouldn't work, and then she would feel less alone.
Right.
Okay. No.
Or maybe her husband could have had some integrity and said,
No. I'll wait.
no, God gave us a promise,
Yeah.
you and I, and we're sticking to that.
Yeah.
There you go.
But
Anyway, so either way, she's not happy about the pregnancy, and she starts to treat Hagar, her servant, badly, and actually bad enough that Hagar ends up running away into the wilderness.
yeah.
So while she's out in the wilderness running away, an angel of the Lord appears to Hagar and says, what are you doing? Where are you going? Where have you come from? And Hagar says she's running from her mistress Sarah because she's been mistreating her.
Right.
God then tells Hagar to return and gives her a promise and tells her about her future child. So God tells her that her descendants are going to be too numerous to count. And when you're reading it, it's like, wait a minute, this sounds a lot like the promise that God gave Abraham.
Yeah.
And so she gets that same promise onto her son. And she says, God tells Hagar, you will have a son. He's going to be named Ishmael, and he'll be wild as a donkey. That's just stuck in there. I find that funny.
Can you imagine
And then
that's
he's going to
your
be
legacy?
fighting with everybody, and everybody's going to be fighting with him. That's the prophecy that's put on his life.
Imagine receiving that. You're like,
Absolutely.
oh, it's going to be okay. There's going to be, he's going to be too numerous to count. Great nation.
Yeah.
Wild as a donkey and fighting with everyone. Okay.
It's like, oh, great.
I'm
Oh,
tracking with you. I'm tracking. Hey, could you maybe make a
tone
change
down
to
the
that last
donkey?
bit
Yeah.
there?
No.
Less
Our
of a donkey
granddad
thing.
had a donkey, which Fletcher got the chance to name and named it Dopey Dopey.
Dopey.
But so Dopey Dopey, and he was pretty calm. So I don't know. When I hear wild as a donkey, I'm like, I don't know, man. Like Dopey Dopey.
but if
was
you like
pretty
mess
calm.
with Dopey Dopey, he'd kick you.
Yeah, and like Dopey Dopey was probably broken. Like you tame.
Broken.
Maybe.
He's
That's
fine.
what- no, that's-
I'm just joking. I
He's
know
a
what
big
you
dog.
mean.
It's called to tame a.
Yeah, when you tame an animal.
Yeah.
Wild as a donkey.
Wild as
So
a
Ishmael
donkey.
is going to be wild as a donkey. That's the prophecy that has been put on him. So Hagar ends up going back, and she gives birth to a son and calls him Ishmael. And Abraham is 86 years old.
And she gives
this
God
happens.
a name there as
Oh,
well.
right. That's the part that I forgot. As she hears this, it says she calls God, or she names God, the one who sees me. And this is actually the well that Abby was talking about. Let's see if I can.
Peter Leroy.
There
Yeah.
you go. And that means, God who sees
Yeah.
me. So she meets with God, and God has seen her, and that's what she identifies God as. So we were just thinking about, like, what is Hagar thinking? She's this Egyptian woman, right? She's from Egypt, who has a pantheon of gods,
Yeah.
and now she's with this family who's like, oh, we're going from Mesopotamia down to Canaan because God told us to, and he
Right.
says he's going to make us, rich and full nation.
Right. And she's like, which God?
Yeah, which God? And you're like, oh, this other God.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. And then she comes with them, and now she's in the middle of the desert, wandering away because she got pregnant with the leader of the
For doing
of the
what she was
family.
told to do.
Right, and now she got in trouble for it
From the wife.
from the wife.
Yeah.
So she's just kind of in a crazy situation, wandering in the desert, pregnant,
Yeah.
crying,
Yeah.
Poor lady.
and then God shows up
Yeah.
and sees her. And I find that just absolutely really cool.
Yeah.
She meets with God, the God, and he sees her, and that has such an impact on her.
Which I just love that. Like, I think of the way that God meets us in our trouble, in our distress, when we feel maybe even completely unseen or hopeless. That's where we meet with God. And we see it in his interaction with Hagar, and we see it in the world around us as people share stories of how they came into relationship with God. It's that they came to a point where they recognize they are seen by God, which I think is awesome.
Yeah. So, she gives birth to a son named Ishmael. Now, next part of the story, we're going to skip ahead about 14 years. Abraham has talked to God a few more times, and he's actually given him a covenant promise. It's called the covenant of circumcision. And God has made these 3 promises to Abraham as long as he upholds his end of the covenant. And that is that his descendants will get the land that they're in, the land of Canaan, that his descendants will be as numerous as the stars, and that all the world will be blessed through his line. And then God has also talked to Sarah and told her that she would have a son. And at this point, she's like 90 years old.
Right.
So when
And
talking,
I think she laughed.
she laughed.
Yeah.
And God still went, no, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm coming back in a year, and you're going to have a son.
Yeah.
So while talking to Abraham, God promised that he would actually bless Ishmael, and that he would be the father of 12 rulers, and that he would become a great nation. So already God has promised to Hagar that Ishmael would become a great nation.
Right.
He's also promised Abraham that Ishmael would become a great nation and have these 12
tension.
sons.
Right. And what's interesting is that this is out of a conversation that Abraham has with God, where he says, can't Ishmael just be the son? And God says no. And there's a really important lesson there in that, because the birth of Abraham's son was to come through God and through God alone, and by God's,
The miracle of
by God's way.
Absolutely.
And so when we cannot expect God to bless the work that we do outside of what he wants us to do. When we are disobedient and we step outside of what he's asked us to do, he's not going to recognize that as his work, and we can't expect him to bless that. We need to remain faithful to what he's put before us, and allow him to bless his work as he does the work in and through us.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, it makes you think. It's like you kind of think of the verse, he'll work together all things through the good, but it has to be coming from a point of his plan.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and faithful is he who calls, and he will do it. He will bring it to pass. And so
Abraham taking it into his own hands is not the way that. Yes. So there's a prophecy that Abraham and Sarah are going to have a son. It comes true. It happens. This is what we talked about a couple seasons ago. Isaac is born, and we'll have another episode about Isaac, and I'm looking forward to that. But they're having this celebration after Isaac's been weaned. So he's done breastfeeding. He's about 2 or 3, and Ishmael's about 16 at the time. And Sarah actually catches Ishmael and Hagar kind of making fun of the baby Isaac. And Sarah goes over to Abraham and says, I'm not having this guy. He's not going to be taking any inheritance from my son. We need to get rid of them.
Right.
So Sarah goes up to Abraham, very mad, and says, banish them, get rid of them, send them away.
Yeah.
So Abraham is not happy about that. Like, it's his firstborn son. He's not happy. He asks God, what should I do? And God tells him, listen to your wife. Don't worry, is what God says. He'll take care of them. He's promised all these things to Ishmael. It's still going to happen. So Abraham accepts and ends up sending them away.
Yep.
So now, once again, Hagar's in the wilderness, and this time she has her son with her. And Abraham sent them off with some food and water, but they're going into the desert. It's only going to last so long. So they end up running out of water. They're sitting in the wilderness, and Hagar sits Ishmael down in the shade and then walks and starts crying. And then all of a sudden, an angel calls out to Hagar and comforts her and saying, don't be afraid. He says that God has heard her and the boy crying, and that she should go comfort him. So go sit with your son. The angel then tells her again that Ishmael will become a great nation. And it then says that God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water and they were able to drink. Right. So I don't know where this well came from, whether it was already there, whether God put it there. They had water and God took care of their needs in the wilderness. And then it continues to say, as Ishmael grew up, that God was with him. And then again, in Genesis 25, we see that the things that God had promised to Abraham and to Hagar, even before his birth, that he had these 12 sons, and then he became a great nation. So in Genesis 25, we see the 12 sons of Ishmael actually named and where they settled. They settled, it's called from Havilah to Shur, and this is actually on the Arabian Peninsula along the, west coast of it. And his people became the Arabic people, the people who settled in Arabia. Right. And then to get to this generational thing, somebody very famous actually claims to be from the line of Ishmael, and that is Muhammad, the prophet and founder of Islam. Right. He claimed he was a descendant of Ishmael, and they lived in the Arabian Peninsula. Right. So Ishmael's, we know there's the Arabic people are a big people now and a huge nation, and then a founder of a major religion as well is involved in that. Yeah. So that's the story of Ishmael and Hagar and their relationship and events with God. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of it's interesting the way it all unfolds, and to see how God is faithful to not only, because we look at the story of Abraham and we see his faithfulness to Abraham. We see his faithfulness to his promise to fulfill his promise and to bring about the Israelites, and as we looked at in season 1, the lineage of Jesus, so all of humanity through Abraham. But then we also see his faithfulness to Hagar, who he appears to and speaks to. We have no indication that she turns to him in worship, and we have no indication that her son and his people do. In fact, we see that they are continually at war with the Israelites. But we still see God's faithfulness to humanity in that as well, which is, you almost see God's, I'm sure, Abraham's promise applied to Isaac and through Sarah, and then you almost see the mercy and the grace that God showed to Hagar. It's like, it's Abraham's son still. Right. Could you please, help my son? And he does. He shows almost mercy and grace to Hagar in blessing her son in that way. And a part of the promise is that the offspring will become a blessing to the people of the world. And guess who populated the people of the world? Ishmael and his sons and his line. And so even though there was tension there, God called Abraham and his family, the Israelites, and
to be a blessing to the rest of the world as well.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. All right. Well, I guess that leads to our final question.
Yes, it does.
So
Season 3, first final question. I keep saying season 3, first thing. What is it?
How does this story contribute to the fulfilling of the rest of the story of God throughout the Bible?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the biggest thing, and that's kind of what we've been talking about the whole time, is God showing up for Hagar.
Yep.
And that really shows his character. And then Hagar's reaction is like, he's the God who sees me and knows me.
Yeah.
And that is the idea of God knowing us and seeing us at our weakest spot is a big,
Right.
I think, lesson in this story.
God has never intended to be exclusive in that no one else is invited in. He is exclusive in that we know that there is only one way to him, and that is through Jesus. But as we see through this text and through other texts, and as we explore throughout this season, we'll see that there are many ways to be pointed towards Jesus and be pointed towards a faith in God doing the work for you. And that's, we know that he does that through Jesus. And so Hagar is pointed towards a trust in God to take care of her and to fulfill her every need, actually. And so that's the character of God, and that's what we see throughout all of Scripture, and pointing towards Jesus, really.
And that concludes episode 1 of season 3.
Woo, thank you
All
so
right.
much for listening. Hope to see you next week.
Bye for now.